right, good evening. Call to order the Monday, March 20th, 2017 meeting of the Arlington Redevelopment Board, recorded by ACMI. First on our agenda this evening is a public hearing for Article 1 regarding special town meeting, zoning bylaw amendment definition. So I'll open that public hearing and hand it over to Jenny Reid.
Great, thank you. I'm Jenny Reid. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. And actually here tonight is Steve McKenna and Liz Pyle, who are from the Residential Study Group, who are going to give a brief presentation about the work that the Residential Study Group has been doing and how it relates to this particular article, and also intersects with the annual town meeting, Article 8. So with that, Steve, Liz.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening. Hi.
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 Good evening. I'm Steve McKenna, a member of Residential Study Group and live at 4 Upland Road in Arlington.
And Elizabeth Pyle, and I'm also a member of the Residential Study Group. I'm a member of Town Meeting, and I live at 66 Gloucester Street in Arlington.
So last year during town meeting, it became aware that there were a lot of issues that were of concern that were brought up for the warrant articles. And as a result of that, as you all know, this Residential Study Group was formed. We've looked at all of the warrant articles as well as everything that we're trying to resolve and try to handle over the next few months to probably the next year with trying to assist in the zoning bylaws. And as a group, we looked at this as really being a puzzle. And as we talked about last year, every action has a reaction. And our goal is to, in a very slow, methodical way, look at what are the major issues and how to start handling some of the biggest concerns. And the biggest concern that we had noticed from last year and totally understand was the safety issue revolving around the garage unders and the driveway unders and the slopes. So as the result of that, last week we presented to you our discussions on changing the slope. And an integral part of making that happen to incentivize, persuade, and alter the opportunity of developers wanting to construct these garage unders is to provide some incentives. And one of the incentives that we look at is something whereas only for new construction, when the developer does not build a driveway that has a 15% greater slope or a garage under, which has been the biggest concern for safety, that we provide them with some incentives. And the incentive we're looking at is to change in one direction, the dimensional size of what we have now for open space is 25 feet as one of the minimum dimensions. Our goal is to reduce that to 20 feet, whereby they still have to meet all the other requirements in the zoning bylaws. So they still have to meet put the glasses on this, the 30% open space requirement. They would still have to meet the required setback regulations. None of the other setbacks would be changed. We think that this is a huge incentive for them to not build the garage unders. And we also feel that the reason why we've brought this up as the eliminating or reducing it by 5 feet is if a developer is to construct a grade surface on grade garage inside the dwelling, based upon the size of the garage, they're going to lose approximately 200 square feet per dwelling unit. And as you know, most of these are being built as two-family style townhouses that are attached. And so the developer is going to lose 200 square feet of living space. Our goal was by reducing that by from 25 to 20 feet. That extra 5 feet, the average width of a house is 40 feet, the depth of a house, the width of a house that can be made. So therefore, they're gaining back that 200 feet that they'll be losing by the purpose of eliminating the garage unders and by putting the garage in the surface parking, or by at least creating parking within the setback requirements or behind the front foundation wall. So it's an opportunity to eliminate the garages. It doesn't change the open space requirement of 30%, nor the setbacks. But we feel that this is an opportunity that developers would look at it that benefits them, it benefits the look of the house. And after speaking with inspectional services, it does not necessarily mean that the size of the house will increase. Right now, these garage unders that are being built, they are 2-car deep to meet the requirements right now of the setback of the 2-car parking requirement. So that means that these dwellings have 4-car parkings underneath the houses. That eliminates a lot of storage. So everybody's using the garage unders for storage, and the cars are being parked up in the driveway anyways. But what they're also doing is because that garage is now not habitable space, nor does it meet the gross floor area. They're building a larger home. We think that this will actually, in some way, the houses will become a little bit smaller, which is something that we're trying to achieve as well.
Because and this is part of the puzzle with Article 8. The puzzle pieces are capping the grade of a downward slope at 15%, reducing the parking from 2 garage spaces per unit to 2 spaces per unit to 1 space per unit, and then this is the third piece, the incentive. So if right now in these 2-family houses, you have, as Steve said, 4 underground spaces, 2 tandem spaces for each unit going under. But if you remove that and parking is at the surface level and you cut the parking requirement to 1 space per unit, then you just have 1 garage for each unit at grade. And the rest of the house is living space. That counts toward gross floor area. And then your open space actually would have to increase also, because your open space has to be 30% of your gross floor area. So by shrinking the garages, you're actually contributing more toward gross floor area and then more toward open space. So it can shrink the overall size of the house. And we talked a lot about this. We thought about the consequences at our hearing, and we felt that the particular people with knowledge of with the realtors, the developers, the builders, felt that this extra provision with reducing the open space in one direction by 5 feet was necessary to really discourage the driveway under design, and that's desirable for both safety reasons and also for issues of scale and massing. And so this is all part of the puzzle, and happy to answer questions about it. But 5 feet, it's pretty modest. It's not going beyond any setback, and you do have
Correct.
open space percentage benefits. So we felt it was a good trade-off.
What about this? I know we've talked about this in the group, just for this board and everyone else. What about this disincentivizes the garage unders? And what makes you think builders will go for this as opposed to the garage under?
Well, as Steve was saying, if you reduce the number of parking spaces, then you have less area devoted to garage and more area devoted to living space. Right now, the garage under design gives so much extra space for. It allows this enormous house to be built on top of the garages.
Right. And part of that is that because of the current zoning bylaws,
Yeah.
developers were forced to build and construct what they're building now. The cost for them, they're building these massive garages, which is not living space. They then have to build a massive house on top of that, which is making a concern for everybody in the neighborhood. It's too large of a house, so their costs are a lot higher. And they have to recoup them somehow. And a couple of these have already been done in the past on Park Street, and quite effectively, quite attractively. Everybody in the neighborhood likes them, and we as a group went over and looked at them and had a good feeling and understanding of why they were built by this particular developer and why they worked so well. And they ended up doing surface parking, 1 garage space inside the front foundation wall, which took away a massive amount of living space. But when you take a look at the scale of these houses that were built, they are actually smaller in height and size than what you've typically seen for some of these other houses that have been built in the last 4 or 5 years.
When you have the garage under design, it with a double garage facade, it gives the appearance of an extra story of the house, because when you're looking at it from the street, you have the garage story and then the first story and then the second story, and it's completely out of scale with the surrounding community. So this would provide an incentive to have more living space at the first level, have less garage space at the first level, but still provide enough area that they can get all the required things that you need on a first floor, kitchen, living room, dining room, on the first floor, and still work around a single garage footprint per unit. And I hadn't realized until I talked to Steve about this that the 2 space per unit requirement was actually encouraging this garage under design, because otherwise it was too hard to get 2 spaces per unit on the lot. And so they figured, well, this is the most efficient way, we'll go down. and then we'll put the house on top of it. And that's what we're trying to do away with, particularly because of the safety concerns with the steep grades.
In addition to Andrew's question, one of the major incentives from a developer's standpoint, now they don't have to do massive drainage at the bottom of the garage, in the driveway area, build the walls, the side walls, create all of that. So this is actually going to bring their costs down, and I think it's going to be, again, aesthetically look a lot better in the town. I think it's going to create a lot of what we're most concerned about is the safety about everybody was walking by and dealing with these garage unders. So I think that this is going to address those issues and we tried to look at it again. Every action has a reaction. We've really tried to look at this from a puzzle standpoint, and this is a critical part of making this work for us.
Ken?
I'm very supportive of this team approach of incentivizing a better design and better safety. I'm just have one question saying, why is this Article 1 and the slope with Article 8? It's not, and are these going to be somehow tied together
Yes.
somehow?
They-
I mean, I think we should say something like, this would be approved only when this is approved, not this is approved and this is not approved?
I think Article 8 will come up first before Article 1.
Okay, so it is not.
The order
not-
is
not a
not-
numerical
not
order.
There's,
that.
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
only
no,
so far
that's
you
just
can
special
go
town meeting.
in a presentation for town meeting and special town meeting, but I think some reference can be made to Article 8 timing into Article 1.
Okay, because I think it's
Right.
really encouraging that they're together.
And then there's also a public meeting on April 6th in the main auditorium,
Auditorium.
where a presentation of all the zoning articles that have moved forward will be made. And at that time, it will be explained by members of the residential study group that these two articles are intended to go hand in hand. I think Liz can probably explain why it came up the way it came up,
It
and why
came up,
Article 1 is necessary.
we had to lock in the warrant language really early in our process, and we were still negotiating and compromising and analyzing, and we realized that we didn't have the right warrant placeholder, and that is why we had to do the
It's
second
fine,
one.
as long as
Yeah.
it, I think we all.
No, they are
agree that-
contingent.
That they all tied together, which
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Will there be slides or something to show
Yes.
on town meeting, so
Yes.
it makes it clear? I mean, I think this is great. I'm just hoping we get this idea across, so there's no confusion or no spinning around where it's something what it's not. I
So-
think,
Yeah, I wasn't at the last meeting, but I saw the visuals, and we received a lot of comments on them, and then we made more comments to Nat Turner, who is the design person, and he's going to revise them. And yes, we think it's very important to have good visuals. Yeah.
Andy?
I'm fine with it. Looks good.
Great.
David?
I'm also very supportive of this approach and appreciate the work of the residential study group in coming up with a good compromise. So, since procedurally the two warrant articles one had to be in special town meeting and one had to be for town meeting, what happens if for some reason one of them doesn't pass?
Well,
It's a concern that we have.
yeah.
It's a big concern, because as we said, again, last year, there were a lot of articles brought forward, the 10 articles, and the premise of them had some sound reasoning. The way they were drafted were not, and that's why we all had issues with them, or certain people had issues with them. And I think this study group has looked at it, and we realize that every action has a reaction. But what we're doing is so critical and important that you can't just throw everything together in a melting pot and say it's going to all happen at once. It truly is, and I've been working with the zoning bylaws for 30 years, representing homeowners, developers, and so forth. And you can tear apart the zoning bylaws that we're drafted right now. And one of the critical things we talked about was, and one of the reasons why these garage units were ultimately built, because the zoning bylaws restricted developers for putting in so much impervious area. So they couldn't have long driveways. So every action has a reaction. That's where we're taking this step by step, very slowly, methodically. And as it was talked about, and this is not to boast, but with all of our meetings collected, we have over 800 hours into this so far. And we've taken these warrant articles to a level that we want to make sure that it provides better safety, something that's good for the community and sets a good base and standard as we start building this pyramid to get to a better place within a year from now.
We've had 25 meetings with 850 collective hours, if you tally up everybody's time who's attended the meeting and spent time and thought about this. We haven't discussed as a group what we would do if Article 8 failed. And we can do that between now and the next time, but if Article 8 failed, I think we should have a discussion about not going forward with STM1, but because I think it's a
that's
package that goes together. So we would make that decision in the event that Article 8 failed.
Well, I think it sounds like there's a good plan for educating the public and town meeting members in particular about how this all works and what it actually means on the ground. And so hopefully that eventuality won't come to pass, but I think it's good to think
Yeah.
it through just so you're ready to respond if that were to happen.
Sure, and I think at all of the public forums for these things and the town meeting groups for the different precincts, we're going to talk about them all together because they are all pieces of the puzzle, and every component that we're changing is critical toward the whole piece of it, and it was part of a carefully thought out solution.
Okay, thank you.
Gene?
I'm going to be in favor of this because I understand the compromise. I would not have come down in the same place on a number of these things, but I understand why it ended up at those places. Here are some of my concerns. If somebody builds a garage on grade or less than 15% down, they can both do that and then park their cars on the side, I think because these are not mutually independent, or they are mutually independent, I think. So you're basically allowing people to park the cars in the garage. Let's say they want to build a two-car garage, which they can do anyhow. This doesn't prohibit it. So they'll do that, and they'll also be able to take advantage of this change in Article 1 of special town meeting and have more parking. So I'm somewhat concerned about that. I'm somewhat concerned about favoring parking outside as opposed to parking in garages. I'm not sure that's the right solution for the town. It's interesting to think about garages. I spent a little bit of time walking around my neighborhood, which is pre-zoning code. The older houses, no garages, right? Later on, small garages, people can't drive their cars in anymore because the doors are too narrow. Later on, large garages, additions, garages. So it's hard to predict whether we're headed toward fewer garage spaces needed, or who knows that's going to be. But I am a little concerned that in the present situation, especially, I think somebody asked a question last week, which is who only has one car, and very few of us raised our hands. Right, I'm one too who raised his hand, but most people didn't. I think we're creating this odd situation where we're favoring cars outside rather than cars inside, incentivizing builders maybe to continue building two-car garages at less than 15% grade because they'll be able to sell them for more money, plus they have the part on the side. And as you and I discussed via email, I think the safety concerns with upward sloping driveways are at least as serious as the safety concerns with downward sloping driveways. I understand you don't agree, but the reading I've done over the past week or so makes me think that. And I think the terrain issues with going uphill are similar to the terrain issues going downhill. So I'm not going to oppose this, but I'm just saying, because it was a compromise, and one doesn't get everything one wants in a compromise, but I think there are a lot of things in this that I think are inappropriate.
I hear what you're saying, Jean. I mean, a lot of this was a compromise, and it was also born of what happened at town meeting last year, where there was a lot of resistance to the upslope regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the safety concerns are still present with the upslope, like the car bottoming out and the iciness. But the pedestrian sight lines are different on the upslope and the downslope, and that is something that we were concerned about. and we felt that was the overriding safety concern. As to doing a 10% grade, I mean, that would be great if it was at a more shallow grade, but the garage has to be on the first floor. It can't be below the grade, so below the first floor of the house. So I don't know your concern.
Builders are pretty good at figuring out what to do. I can see split levels coming back pretty easily. So we don't have to get into all the details of this because everything has potentially an unintended consequence. I'm not going to vote against it. I just would not have come down in the same place on part of it.
And just to respond to a couple of the comments you made, one of the things that we feel that this puzzle has to fit together is the current zoning bylaws require 2 parking spaces behind the setback, or the front foundation, which the redevelopers are building it.
Right.
So if you look at a single-family home, and if it's built on grade, the garages then are not considered part of the GFA, which is causing the massing of these houses, which was the concern. And so our feeling was by eliminating to 1-car parking. And the reality is, and I mentioned this last week, I've been in thousands of homes for my career. There are very few people, with the exception of me, who doesn't have kids and I'm a neat freak, and I can complain about that to everybody, an OCD problem. Nobody uses the garages for garages. It's filled with stuff. So all the parking is in the driveways, a good portion of it. But because of the zoning bylaws, there is a restriction on how much paved area you can actually have.
I walked around my neighborhood and I was thinking about this, and a lot of the people in the neighborhood who park their cars outside, I realized have antique cars in their garages. There's like a Model A Ford or a Model T Ford, an old MG. They have lots of interesting things, and some people have woodworking shops. So it's a mix of things. I did want to mention one of the other things that concern me, which is out of scale, in that there are neighborhoods where it would clearly be out of scale, and there are neighborhoods where it would not be out of scale, and this doesn't take into account that distinction. There are blocks in my neighborhood where it would not be out of scale to have another house like this. A house like that next to mine would not be out of scale. A few blocks away it would. And I'm just concerned that it doesn't take into account those differences and that there's not something that allows for that.
Yeah, we looked at neighborhood districts, and we felt it was beyond our ability to do that now, but that's something that we discussed.
Okay. Anything else from the board? Open up for public comment, questions. Please raise your hand, stand up, state your name and address, and address your questions to the board, please.
Yes, Bob Radosha, 45 Columbia Road, Allen. Of course, Allen. I tried to understand this today. I was having a problem trying to figure it out. And the examples I think of what happened here, what might have brought some of this on, is a lot of recent construction, a lot down in East Arlington. And the reason the garages went under was because you couldn't get two driveways on each side of the house. Many of the lots, in fact, probably most of them, down in the other end, only have about a 50-foot frontage. And to deal with 50 feet and then a 24 house or something, and probably a little bump out here or there, you don't have the room for 2 side driveways. So I think that probably brought in a lot of it. And then I was trying to think of where it might apply to something with 120-foot frontage. You wouldn't have a problem with it. So it's those are the examples I see. And the 1-car issue is not really realistic, I don't think. Again, in my neighborhood, I think there are 42 people and 39 cars. Right? And every kid hits 16, there's a car in the driveway for him. And what's going to happen with the 1-car space along the side of the house, it'll be the car in front, the tandem parking right up to the street anyhow. So I'm not sure what this really is going to accomplish. But making the slope lower pushes the house back.
Well, one of the things, can I respond
You can.
to it? One of the things to know is that, practically speaking, this is going to apply to the new construction. And we also talked about having less cars as being a sustainable choice. So all the houses that exist and have driveways and the 2 parking spaces per unit, that will all continue to exist, but people that buy the new houses going forward will have to know that they have that limit, and that this is a direction for the environment, that we talked about encouraging people to go and to have less cars. We also talked about how there might be more self-driving cars in the future and more ride sharing, and we wanted to contribute to that sustainability conversation in that way. But that would be a limit
Okay,
for
yeah.
those people.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Bruce Welchel, 94 Coolidge Road, second precinct 12 near Loveland's Farm. Member of the public needing to be educated. I don't understand whether this applies strictly to R2 districts and higher, or whether it's intended to be overall. Does it include R1?
It does. It includes R1, R0, R1, and R2. And it does have 3-family also, so I guess that's R3.
Well, it's all
Yeah.
together, right?
Well, I am concerned not so much about giving incentive to developers who seem to be very adept at finding a way to build large houses and maximize the envelope. I live on a 5,000 square foot lot, 50 by 100, that was platformed when it was built in 1930. It is on a street between the private way, Coolidge, to Mount Vernon Street, which is public way. Across the 100-foot depth, we have a 50-foot drop, a 25% grade uniformly. The property next door to mine was a 5,000 square foot lot until 5 years ago, when 4 similar lots were subdivided to create 6,000 square foot lots. And that was accomplished by taking the rectangle of 50 by 100 feet and taking a 500-foot triangle out of the backyard of the only other house on the property. Empty lot, house lot, empty lot, empty lot. By taking another triangle out of the front to get to 60 feet of frontage. So you're talking about a 5,000 square foot lot masquerading as a 6,000 square foot lot, in effect, with a 25% grade. I am very concerned about the loss of permeable surface on properties like this. This is immediately threatened with development. The only reason that it has not already been developed is that there is a stream and an adjacent upland resource area that affects all of these 4 lots. So it is before the Conservation Commission. What the developer is proposing at the present time, street grade level is 100 nominal. The developer is proposing a 12-foot high retaining wall in the side yard in order to provide parking space to go all the way back. We're going to have the loss of a substantial amount of permeable surface. It seems to me that there is too little concern in some of these sweeping one-size-fits-all zoning changes to take into account the small houses that will still, for the time being at any rate, dominate the neighborhood. There are a number of streets within this private way area, Robbins Road, Kenilworth, and others, that are 1950s teardowns, basically. They're 5,000 square foot lots. The builders are going to find a way to maximize the envelope. And frankly, I can see more problems coming out of something like this than solutions. If it were limited to something like R2 area and above, I can see that for reasons that Bob Radosha has suggested. 50-foot lot, even a 60-foot wide lot that is built as infill is going to pose a great hardship on a number of these neighborhoods, because we're seeing 3 things happen. We're seeing subdividing of lots. If Bob knows about 120-foot frontage, I can name 3 developers to you who will have a postcard in the mail tomorrow seeking to buy that lot and subdivide it. We're having subdividing, we're having hydraulic fracturing, because 2/3 of Arlington, Morningside, up around McLennan Park, my area around Robbins Farm and Park Circle Water Tower, is all bedrock. Subdivide, fracture, clear cut. We have already in place a a tree bylaw, that is just cost of doing business. $500 a tree is the penalty. It seems to me those are overarching problems that I don't think can be addressed in the, I hear what the two members of the committee are saying here. That you're trying to work your way to a better system. I frankly don't think this is going to do it in a number of cases.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you for coming and speaking up tonight. Much of that is out of scope of what we're discussing here, but I can tell you that those discussions are being had in the residential study group, and both Elizabeth and Steve, I'm sure, would be happy to speak with you further about your concerns as that group sets its priorities heading into the next cycle of town meeting. And all of those things are still being discussed and very much on the table. So thank you.
Bruce, this is just one small part of an overall package of one small part of what we were looking at, and it took a tremendous amount of time to get to this point with garage unders, but this is not the only thing that the residential study group is going to look at. And I'd be happy to talk with you about how this affects things, and we should do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think if you don't mind,
Go
it's
ahead.
important to say that for people to understand that in the residential study group, we have people that, we have such great mutual respect for each other, and everything you've discussed, we've discussed. We realize it's a process we have to take, but in that, we have opponents to new construction, opponents to tear downs, we have proponents for new, we're working together as a team. We don't always agree, but we've really taken what we thought was the biggest issue that was challenged last year to try to make it somewhat safer and restrict a lot of these garage unders. And that's why we're talking about the open space area, but everything you've talked about, we're going to be addressing in the future as well.
Thanks. Others?
Did you want to speak?
Actually, one quick question. Steve McCallica, 17 Russell Street, town meeting member. The 15%, I know you talked about one of the objectives is to improve the safety of the slope driveways. Is there an investigation of the 15%? Is that determined that will result in a safe driveway at that point? So we had in my neighborhood a couple of these where the people end up parking their cars.
I'm going to stop you now, and that's actually to do with Article 8, not Article 1, which we'll come back to later in the meeting. And
You were talking about both earlier, so.
Liz, you can answer his question now.
Okay.
I just wondered with 15%.
Sure. So we did a comprehensive investigation and looked at all the leading authorities. We talked to the town engineer, looked at Mass Department of Transportation guidance, National Highway Safety Engineers, for street design and driveway design. I don't have all the citations right here in front of me, but we looked at all of these recommendations and also at other municipalities and where they have done it. And we determined after doing this analysis that 15% was the maximum safe grade for a residential driveway.
Thank you.
Sure.
Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Loretti, 56 Adams Street. First, I'd like to get a couple of clarifications, and I have a few comments. Am I correct in thinking this article was submitted by the town manager?
On behalf of the residential study group.
I think that's right.
Do either of those parties have authority to submit zoning bylaw amendments to initiate them?
They do.
They do? Under what authority?
It is my understanding from the town council that they have the authority to submit warrant articles.
Yes, under what
I'm not-
authority?
Well, I'm not answering on behalf of the town council. I'm telling you, and whether it's an acceptable answer to you or not,
Yeah.
that is the answer that we received and that we've been proceeding with that understanding in mind.
So you're saying town manager, town council told you they did, is your answer? My understanding,
That
the
is what I
zoning
said.
bylaw says
Yes.
amendments can be made under, I think it's section 5 of chapter 48, which does not give the town manager or this type of study group the authority to initiate zoning changes. But be that as it may, I have a clarification based on something Mr. Benson said, and that is if a developer puts in a driveway that has a slope of less than 15%, does that count as, and I think the terminology in this change is at the surface level? Or does at the surface level mean no slope at all?
at the surface level, the building inspector said that at the surface level means the garage has to be on the ground floor. It is not below, there's not a below the ground floor garage.
So
At the
somebody putting a
surface
10% slope
would still
That's
apply.
below, that's below
would
grade.
not
below grade.
qualify for this
No.
benefit, is that correct?
Right.
My feeling about this is, one, simply it's not needed. And I'd like to explain to you why. Mr. Valarelli was kind enough to give me his list of examples of these types of two-family or houses that have the sloped driveway. And he had a sample of 9 of them. All of them were two-family houses. And the thing you need to remember is that when they build these houses, they build them back farther than the required minimum setback in the R2 zoning district. The average setback for these houses was 26 feet. So by building at surface, they get, on average, based on his data, a minimum of a 6-foot benefit that they can build closer to the street. But that's only part of the story, because the zoning bylaw allows you to set the setback at the average of the other houses on the street if it's in a developed area. And Arlington being almost essentially all developed, that often occurs. In fact, Mr. Nyberg, who I don't think is here tonight, he built a two-family house with a less than a 14-foot setback. And that's typical. So it's not like the developers are having to give up a lot of space by building at the surface. In fact, they can bring the house much closer to the street. Now, this example that was given on Park Street, and I was under the impression that those were double depth parking within the house. If I'm incorrect, and it's only one, then the only reason that happened is that those are very deep lots. What I see happening is the houses being built closer to the street, and then the additional parking being put in the front yard on the driveway in front of those garages. That itself is a safety hazard. And it's a safety hazard because, as I said, all of these houses are two families. They will always have the driveway and the parking next to each other, because you're not going to get into a situation where each of the families is getting into playing musical cars one in front of the other. And what that means is when you have two cars parked next to the sidewalk, next to each other, it's very difficult to see the sidewalk and the street as one backs out while the other's parked there. So all you're doing is trading one safety hazard for another by putting, by encouraging that front yard parking in this way. The other thing I would want to point out, and I think that the gentleman next to me raised a very good point about the zoning districts to which this applies. There's no need for any of this to apply to R3 because all three-family houses require a special permit, period. You're going to come before a board. You're not granting them anything by relaxing it. You can't relax it. It's already in the bylaw for other reasons. But the other thing I wanted to point out is I did a survey of all of the houses that received, or new construction that occurred last year. I could identify about 20 houses that was new construction. Of those, one was a 3-family, the other 20 were 1 and 2 families, and 14 of those were single families and 6 were 2 families. As far as I know, none of those single-family homes have the garage down under like we're talking about. So I don't understand why you're providing an incentive for them essentially to build bigger houses by reducing this, by changing this definition. And the thing you have to remember is that while the front yard setback might be 20 feet, and the backyard setback 20 feet, and the side yard setbacks 10 feet on either side, because of this 25-foot minimum, it actually ends up requiring a larger setback, and that's typically put in the backyard. So essentially what you're saying is you're allowing smaller backyards to be built, and most of the people who are going to benefit from this are the free riders. They're people who never planned to put these downward sloping driveways in the first place. And when you create incentives, you want the incentives to go to the people who need them, not the people who don't need them. And in the vast majority of cases, you're providing for the free riders. Even for the 2-family houses, I could only identify, of the 6 that were 2 families, 2 and maybe 3 at most that had these driveways, because builders are building them now with the driveways at grade. Mr. Nyberg did that. There's one on being built right now on Winter Street that has it at grade. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but there's one on Maynard Street that's also at grade, as far as I can tell. So, you know, it's not like we're seeing a huge number of these houses that fall under this category. And I think, you know, you're making very significant changes that apply across the town, and I think, I don't think the implications have fully been considered. So I oppose this one completely, but at a minimum, I think you should be eliminating it for single-family and three-family houses, because the only ones it's all relevant to is two families.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to mention is I find it rather astounding that when your own board was putting together a warrant article last year, you were looking to increase the open space on the lot. What you're doing now is effectively decreasing the open space. And the other thing I'm going to mention is that the driver isn't necessarily the floor area of the house, of the total house, and the required open space, it's the lot coverage. And what you're doing is actually allowing more lot coverage by making this change. So anyway.
Chris, I'll disagree with that one there, okay?
Yeah.
We're not decreasing the amount of open space. We're just reallocating the dimensional requirements of the open space. The actual percentage of the open space is the same.
But what I'm saying is because of that 25-foot, you know, minimum, most of the time the developers have to over-comply with the open space requirement.
But that's not a decrease in the open space requirements.
Well,
You're stating something that is not factual.
What I'm stating is you're allowing bigger houses, and that is factual. It
No, I
absolutely is
disagree.
factual.
We
I
disagree
disagree
with
with
that. We've
that.
actually had studies on that, and that is not factual.
And I think as someone pointed out, where this is particularly damaging is on undersized lot, because the other thing you have to consider is that while nominally the minimum lot size in the R2 and R1 district is 6,000 square feet, the way Arlington does its grandfathering, they allow a 5,000 square foot lot if a house was previously constructed there and was torn down to be treated just like a 6,000 square foot lot. And again, that's something that the zoning bylaw is inconsistent with state law, and it's an interpretation of state law, but that's what happens. And the people who are going to be mostly damaged by this are those of us who live in East Arlington on smaller sized lots, and that's why I'm here tonight. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Other comments, questions from the board? Okay. I think our original discussion regarding this was that the meeting would be held tonight for the public hearing. We'd leave comment open for a week and take our vote next week. So with that, I will leave the public comment period open. I encourage members of the public to fill us in on their thoughts, and I will continue the public hearing to next week for a motion.
Motion to continue March 27th to March 27th, Article 1.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Article 2.
Do we need to stay here?
No, you guys can step back. Please stay.
Okay,
So, open public hearing on Article 2, zoning bylaw amendment, recreational marijuana moratorium. Jenny?
all right, so, board members, you should have received today an email not long ago from the town manager regarding special town meeting warrant Article 2. Yes, and are there copies of these in that group over there?
There's
The packet, just
no, it's toward the back of
Yeah.
the packet.
so there are packets on the table, and a copy of this is over there. So with that, this was filed by the town manager, which is why he provided you with this memo. It is essentially providing the town with additional time to consider the implications and the planning around recreational marijuana. The moratorium would be effective through June 30th of 2018. The town manager indicated that the reason why this was not filed for annual town meeting and why it's appearing on special town meeting is because we were waiting to learn about whether or not a decision from West Bridgewater was made, and it was made favorably by the AG's office, so that is why Adam then decided to file this article. It would provide essentially further time for planning efforts and discussion with the community prior to any zoning recommendations are made to town meeting and a future town meeting. So I can answer questions if you have any.
How do they determine the length of the moratorium?
I think that was the time frame that was granted to West Bridgewater, so that is why that was chosen.
Kim, I'll start with you.
No, I have no questions on this.
Yeah.
No questions on
David?
Makes sense to me. There are still a lot of ambiguities regarding the implementation of sales of recreational sales of marijuana. And given the timing of our town meeting in 2018, unless the state acts to further delay recreational sales of marijuana, town meeting will not have a chance to consider any additional changes to our zoning or other provisions prior to that taking effect. So this gives town meeting time to actually happen in 2018 by extending the moratorium for an additional couple of months. So I think it makes sense.
Okay. I do support this. I want to say that. It's also my understanding that the way any municipality can prohibit recreational marijuana from moving in is via a townwide ballot question.
That's right. That's not what this is, though.
This is not what this
No.
is. But does it
No, it doesn't.
expand
It
time
doesn't.
beyond that for
We
town
don't
election
have any
2018?
information about that, and that's not related to this particular
Okay.
request.
Okay.
So, and it's in relation to waiting for the regulations to be issued, which is
Yeah.
what you're referencing.
Okay.
And so maybe the regulations will be issued much sooner, and then we will have plenty of time to plan, but maybe they will be issued by March, I believe is the date, of 2018. And that's awfully close to the time horizon for getting everything adopted, based on our town meeting.
Gene?
I have no comments on it.
Okay. Questions from the public? Yes, sir.
Yeah, excuse me, Jordan Weinstein, 23 Lennon Road, Precinct 21. I have a couple of questions and then a statement I'd like to make. The first question is, what kinds of things are you expecting to be regulated by the state that would impact your decisions and how you would agree or not agree to cite a recreational marijuana outlet?
I can't answer that without seeing what might come out from the state. I don't know, Jenny, if you have any idea of what we might expect to see.
So some of the things that we might expect to see relate to the location, the implementation actual timeline, which would include where marijuana can be used. We'd need more information about the actual licensing process, which we do not have.
I'm sorry, when you say where marijuana can be used?
The personal use of marijuana is actually
Oh, where?
part,
Okay.
in that particular
Well,
regard.
it's only allowed in privacy, it's not allowed on
So-
public streets.
So I'd like to keep the discussion tonight from
I'm
getting
only-
down the road of the benefits of, the pros and cons of marijuana. I don't think that's a fair discussion to
Oh,
have
no.
right now. But I can
I'm
see,
not-
but I can see that might be where it goes.
No,
Not
that's
necessarily
not where
from
it's
you,
going at
just
all.
let me finish. I can see that's where it might go, and that's not what this article is about. This is about simply extending the time for the town to have some time to study, to wait for the state regulations to come out and see what might come. But you can continue.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I was actually continuing. The local control mechanisms and employment implications, those are all of the things that would come with the regulations. It's not just about local zoning, but there are other things that are coming out with the regulations whenever that does occur. So those are some of the things to consider, but we have not received any specific guidance, and I think that when it came to medical marijuana treatment centers, the town did receive guidance from the Department of Public Health at that time. And there was something that we could work with in terms of thinking about the siting, which led to the discussions around that. So we don't have any guidance at all to work with.
This might be a leading question, but is there any sense that Arlington, either your department or others, are actually going to seek a complete banning of recreational pot shops?
it wouldn't come directly from my office, the Department of Planning and Community Development. That is something that would have to be voted on by the Board of Selectmen,
Okay.
okay, not this board.
Okay.
And that's something that goes to a ballot question. So, again, not by this board, but the Board of Selectmen.
I'd just like to now to just share my feeling about this and my opinion about it. I grew up in the 60s, where marijuana was considered an evil thing and a dangerous drug, and society has come around quite a bit. But the citizens of this state, and as far as I understand it, about 60% of the voters in Arlington voted in favor of this legalization. And I'm just concerned that the delaying of even a temporary moratorium is potentially going to be used to ultimately refuse to give commercial sites a chance to open in Arlington. There are at least 5 bills on Beacon Hill right now that probably are moving in that direction. And the will of the people, I think, is being thwarted, and largely on Beacon Hill right now, but I think that this is an example of the reticence and the historical discrimination against marijuana versus alcohol. So what I would posit to you is that one of the problems with delaying the actual sale of marijuana is that for 3 months in addition, people are going to be breaking the law and will be criminalized. The use of marijuana is legal now. The possession of it, to a degree, is legal. The sale and the purchase of it is illegal. You're essentially taking a legal activity and you're making it continually to be, where do people actually, how do they get this marijuana if they don't grow it themselves? They have to illegally purchase it. And by delaying the ability of people in Arlington to purchase it legally, you're turning many Arlington residents into criminals. You're forcing them to be criminals. And that's one thing I just want to say for you to keep in mind. I know it's not an argument that I've heard elsewhere, but that's how I think of it. And I think, frankly, that ultimately it will be passed. And if Arlington is accepting now the establishment of liquor stores or wine and beer stores after such a long history of prohibition and being a dry town, I don't see any reason why it shouldn't move as quickly as possible to legalizing marijuana stores. I've seen them. I've been in one in Washington State. They're not these head shops where you see crazy people congregating. It's as indistinct from any other retail business with minimal signage.
Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. Just one clarification. When you were looking at medical marijuana treatment centers, there was actually a moratorium prior to the adoption of the zoning that is now in place. So there was that precedent in terms of waiting for a regulatory process to be completed and then having the town's bylaws put in place in 2014. Medical marijuana was legal in 2013, but took time before municipalities throughout the Commonwealth adopted zoning bylaws. So there was a time period where there was a moratorium, actually.
Okay.
Just to provide a point of reference about such a practice in the past.
Thanks, Jenny. Other comments, questions? Mr. Lurie.
Chairman, just a couple of questions. Did I hear reference to some memorandum from the town manager? I didn't see that in the packet.
As I referenced in my earlier remarks, it is on the table in the packet, in the back of the packet. It came in at about, sometime right before the meeting. So that's when we
Okay, I
received
didn't
it.
have a chance to read it. Did the town manager, actually, let's see what the back of this packet.
Here.
We have additional copies of you.
Did the town manager happen to say whether he was filing this at the request or the initiative of the Board of Selectmen?
Not in the letter.
We don't have that indication.
I mean, I would have thought that something like, has the board independently received any guidance from the Board of Selectmen?
No.
Okay, so they're not showing any leadership on this, as far as you know.
Do you have a question?
Well, it seems very odd to me that the policy-making board of the town isn't taking a policy position.
I would take that
on
up with them
something.
then, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay, I guess I don't have any other questions, but there's nobody here representing the town manager.
There's no one here from the town manager.
Usually the proponents of an article come before the board. The selectmen always criticize people who don't show up. I know your board members do that.
And the town manager has indicated that I am representative this
you are.
evening on behalf of him, and that is why I prepared the remarks that I gave in the beginning,
Okay,
based upon
it
the
wasn't
memo
clear to
that
me
was
that.
provided by him.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Others? So we can continue this to next week for additional public comment to come in via email or snail mail. And to this meeting, March 27th.
I motion to continue this Article 2 to our next meeting, March 27th.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, now reopen.
Could I ask you one question?
Yes.
What's the
Wait.
what's the vehicle for public comment to reach this
Email.
board?
All of our emails are on the town website. Thank you. All right. I will now reopen continued public hearing for Article 6 zoning bylaw amendment regarding mixed-use business and industrial zones. Laura.
Which is also that's also toward the end of your packets, about maybe 5 pages in. Did you want me to
You
repeat what I
could do a
said
quick
last week?
recap of where,
So this article would, in mixed-use properties, would remove the minimum lot area per dwelling unit in all districts. What that would do is to allow more units or units of varying sizes without increasing the building size. So it's all within the same building envelope, the same height restrictions, none of that would be changed, just that lot area per dwelling unit, which causes units to be larger and fewer within the building. And this was something that 2 different developers who we've worked with in the past year have told us was inhibiting their doing the project that they would have preferred to do.
okay. I don't think I had any additional questions or comments on this, aside to say that I support it. I think it's good to encourage that kind of development in town. You know how hard we worked to get it approved last year. So, Tim?
No, I have no comments.
I support it too, no further comment.
David?
No comments?
No comments?
We were
Just add for the record that we did not receive any comments either by email or mail or in person as far as I'm aware of. It's since last meeting and tonight.
okay.
And I will say
That's
one more
actually
thing.
really good point.
At the second to last page of your packet is a letter from the Master Plan Implementation Committee, which endorsed this article.
Oh, thank you
I
for
don't know if
pointing
you
that
got
out.
it. It's
Laura.
way at the back, sorry.
Yeah, I should point out that the Master Plan Implementation Committee has reached out via that letter to support all the zoning bylaw amendments, and we do have a member, Wendy Richter, here with us this evening. Do you have anything to say about the Master Plan Implementation Committee's support?
Just that we are supporting it and that a lot of hard work has gone into, especially the residential study group.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions, comments, or concerns from anyone in attendance this evening?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've already spoken on this. I don't want to repeat myself. Again, I didn't see that letter in the packet that was over.
It's the, well, here.
But anyway, I'm not going to take
It
the
is
time
in
to
the
read that.
packet.
I would just ask, I've already expressed my opposition to this article, but assuming you do go forward with it, I would ask that you correct the current listing of the bylaw for the B1 zoning district dimension requirements. What's listed there is not what was approved last year at town meeting and submitted to the Attorney General for approval. And in particular, the minimum lot size in the B1 district is missing, and also the usable open space requirement for the B1 zoning district. And I think town council, I believe, or should have been, working with the Attorney General to get that resolved.
What did you say, the minimum lot size and what else?
And the usable open space requirement. If you look at the certified votes of town meeting that were given to the Attorney General's office for approval, they have what town meeting passed, and they should be reflected, in whatever you put before town meeting, so you go forward with it. Thank you.
Laura, can you verify that that's correct before it?
Oh, there's been a little confusion around that, so we'll work to get it fixed before town meeting. I mean, it doesn't have any impact on this article. I know. Yeah.
Okay.
But the problem that happens though is if you pass it, and then you show what the existing bylaw is, and the existing bylaw is wrong, then you get an approved bylaw back from the Attorney General that's not correct. That's why you need to have it fixed.
Ensure that it's fixed. Other comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll close public comment period for Article 6. Turn it back to the board for any additional comments, questions, or concerns. None, we'll move to a vote.
Motion to support Article 6.
To move to endorse.
I motion to endorse Article 6. Zoning bylaw amendment to mixed use in business and industrial zones.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Moving on, continued public hearing for Article 7, zoning bylaw amendment, definitions of artisanal fabrication. Laura.
This was a change in the definition that removes the maximum square foot size of 5,000 square feet for businesses that fall into this category. The reason being that many of these type of businesses, especially production of alcohol and food processing, are uses that would need more than 5,000 or possibly might start at under 5,000 with a large investment in equipment, and then would not be able to grow, which wouldn't really be serving the best interests of the town.
I did support this last week. I continue to support it. We have not received any public comment outside of the meeting last week.
I have no comments on this.
Andy.
No comment.
David.
I know there was some discussion last week about whether we were potentially opening ourselves up to unintended consequences by not putting any limitation on the size of these facilities. And I just wanted to remind the board that there was that concern.
Thank you. I understand that concern. I don't know. I think Arlington is so small and dense, and where these projects would likely be situated they automatically be limited just based on the size of any lot that they could purchase, even in the aggregate.
If I could just say one thing about the master plan. There was a lot of concern about us getting rid of any industry that we had in town, and and a lot of the industry that we have are businesses that are in shrinking industries, and this would potentially be in more growth industries and might actually provide some employment for Arlington residents and keep us from being completely residential. So, I don't know. To me, I think it was one of the things that was frequently stated in the master plan, that we wanted to encourage more employment opportunities through new industry.
I think this does accomplish that.
I completely support that objective and these kinds of businesses. Just wanted to make sure we were thinking it through.
Gene.
I have no comments on this.
Any comments for members of the crowd? Seeing none, I will close public comment on Article 7 and turn to the board for a vote to endorse. Recommended action.
I recommend that the board endorse Article 7, zoning bylaw amendment, definitions, artisanal fabrication. Is that what I'm
Yes.
endorsing? We are endorsing.
action to town meeting.
Action to town meeting. Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jenny. All right, moving on. Continuing Article 8 regarding zoning bylaw amendment, residential driveway, parking accommodation zoning changes left open. Again, we received no comments from outside sources, I believe.
We had
Jenny?
one, we actually did have one, which was from Pete Howard, and that letter, which packet is that in?
That's in.
I'm sorry.
Second to last page.
Because of what day. That was the comment letter we received. Anyway,
Yeah.
with that, I'm actually again going to invite back up Steve McKenna and Elizabeth Pyle.
Stevens, please come up. No need to reintroduce yourself. Thanks for coming. And thank you for your work on all of this. So just kind of recap where we were and whether anything has changed based on suggestions from last week.
Hi, I think there may have been some confusion about whether this article applied only to newly constructed houses, and it does not. And this new suggested red line should be removed. That's not something that our committee agreed to. This right here in the packet for newly constructed single, two-family, or duplex houses, that newly constructed should not be there, because to put that newly constructed language in would make it permissible for anyone to park in the front yard anywhere in town, even on the grass. So the it should just be for single, two-family, or duplex, or three-family dwellings. Off-street parking shall not be permitted in the area between the front lot line and the minimum front yard setback, except on a driveway not exceeding 20 feet in width, leading to the required parking spaces. That sentence coupled with the next one, saying where off-street parking is permitted, has been interpreted by the building department to mean that parking is not permitted in the front yard, within the front setback, except on a driveway. And this is the provision that also limits, in the table where we reduce the parking from 2 spaces per unit to 1 space per unit. This says where those spaces have to go. And the way the building department interprets this provision is that they have to go behind the front setback. So the residential study group did not endorse this provision here. This, I think, was a mistake.
I think that was my mistake from some
Mhm.
confusion last week. I apologize for that, but you're right. That should come out of the recommended vote. Study vote to have to be taken as amended based on what's here. Any further comment?
No, I think this is what we talked about earlier tonight and last week, how this is all part of having slope limited to a maximum of 15% for safety issues, and also to control the garage under design and the problems with massing and scale that creates.
Okay, thank you. So I do support this. I continue to support it. Just as a reminder, this came out of the residential study group, which was established at town meeting last year following the fight over competing zoning articles. And that group is really comprised of a wide swath of Arlingtonians, from attorneys to the development community, realtors, people who were part of the citizens group that put forth a number of articles last year. The articles that have been put forth here, the articles that have been put forth in front of the Board of Selectmen, which were all unanimously endorsed last week, are the result of some compromise, some hard work, and some serious thought toward making residential development in Arlington more manageable and more equitable, I think. I fully endorse Article 8. Ken?
I have no additional questions. I'm supportive of this too.
Thank you.
Andy?
I also support this article, and I've heard quite a bit of testimony or reviews, and so we've really been brought along to, in fact, it was months ago that we realized the importance of this bundle of new regulations that I think will have an impact as Andrew says. So I endorse it.
David?
I also support this. I realize that it is a compromise, but I do think it moves us forward in a direction that that the various interest groups that came to the fore last year can agree on. So I'm supportive.
Gene.
Well, I won't repeat everything I had to say, other than to say I think the safety issues on the downward sloping driveways is real. I think everything else moves us sideways, but I will support it.
Come to the residential study group's next meeting. We'll talk about it as we set priorities. Questions, comments from members of the public? Mr. Loretti.
Thank you, Chair. I'm confused because about just what this applies to, because last week the statement was made that this only applied to newly constructed houses. And when
I've already admitted that that was a statement made in error and that should come out.
Okay, so that this change in the package should not be there.
That's correct.
So this applies to all houses. So even though this group was formed to address the issue of sloping driveways, you're making a change that applies to all homes in the town having the parking requirements for all 1, 2, and 3 family homes. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So I could take away,
Not existing.
I could now take away 2 of my 4 required parking spaces and then park in the front yard on the driveway, which I could do already, but I could build an addition where those spaces are now and then use the allowance in the bylaw for parking in the driveway leading to the required spaces, because now only 2 spaces are required, correct?
No, Chris, I don't think that you can do that because
not?
a garage
I'm
does not
no
count.
garage, no garage.
I don't understand what you're saying then.
I don't have a garage. What I'm saying.
What do you have?
I have at least parking for 4 cars on a driveway behind the face of the house.
So what do you want to do with that?
Well, what
you
you're saying,
you want to
what you're
make less
saying is,
pavement?
what you're saying now is I can build a big addition, as close as I possibly can to the line in my neighbor's house, because I no longer have to have that space available for the cars. I only need 2 spaces for my 2-family house instead of 4.
Okay, so if you have a situation where you have a big paved area in the back of your house because you have 4 parking spaces
It's not in the
there,
back,
where is it?
it's on the side, like most 2-family houses in Arlington.
You have a long driveway with 4 spaces?
It only has to be 36 feet long behind the face of the house.
I'm just trying to figure out, so I can understand what you're talking
Yeah.
about, Chris, so I can answer your question.
Yeah.
You're talking about not a garage space, just an open space on a driveway? I mean,
Yes.
The size of any addition that you would build is still constrained by your open space requirements and your floor area ratio
Understood.
and all of that.
Understood, but old houses, what I really see here is a real lack of appreciation between the difference in the way that new houses are constructed today versus the way they were 90 years ago, where typically you would not see a footprint of a house bigger than 12, maybe 1,300 square feet at the most on a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot lot, where today's developers want to max it out, to 2,100 square feet on the 6,000 square foot lot. And that's what you're promoting by these changes. Absolutely.
So Chris, if I might say a few things, I think, first of all, I think your scare tactics and what you're
These
saying.
aren't scare tactics,
Let me
Steve.
finish.
These are reality.
No,
And I'm gonna compile the statistics to show town meeting, but go ahead.
So what you're proposing and suggesting is that you want to eliminate your existing parking, which you need for your tenants, or you need for yourself. You want to limit it, and you want to increase the size of your house. But as Liz said, you still have to conform to all the regulations with regards to side yard setbacks, height requirements, open space requirement, floor area ratio. And as you know, if anybody else does, you more so than anyone, the building inspector is very diligent in his efforts to making sure that everybody is adhered to those. And these zoning bylaws are extremely restrictive. And they're so restrictive is that's what's caused these 2-car garage units to be built. Based upon last year's town warrant articles and the meeting, it was, all of those were proposed in what I would call in a sledgehammer, sort of just throw it upon everybody. And some of them had merit. What we're doing as a residential study group is we're taking a scalpel, we're taking our time, and we're looking at the safety factor for not just one neighborhood, one person, one house, but for the entire community. We're looking at all the zoning bylaws and how it affects people that live in East Arlington on a flat lot, how it affects people that live in Arlington Heights that have a steep lot. We're taking a look at houses that are on a 5,000 square foot lot, a 6,000 square foot lot, and an RO lot, where they have to have 9,000 square feet of land and 75 feet of frontage. So we're looking at everything, but we can't just say that we're gonna make changes all in one broad scope. So we're looking at what is most important and critical for the safety of people and what has been affected. And what has been built over the last 2 or 3 years that caused these warrant articles were the two-family, downward slope, grade garages that caused a lot of conflict. And there were single-family houses built that way as well. If you go down to Kelwin Manor in East Arlington, there was some that built there as well. Everything that we've proposed here, I think it's critical, and we said this is a puzzle. It's not just Article 1, it's not Article 8, it's also what we're doing with the bylaws that we proposed for the town. We're putting a lot of restrictions and covenants for the developers to make notification to neighbors, to have certain requirements, and then we're imposing this. And so we're really taking a diligent effort at this. So to tear apart one specific part, just to say that you don't like it because of this or that, I think you have to really take a look at the broad scope of what we're trying to do. We are trying to better Liz, us, the 10 of the people in the group, we are trying to better the development and propose what works good for everyone in the town. And I think we're doing a darn good job at it. We're not just here playing tiddlywinks, we're not just here saying we're agreeing to it. We're going back and forth, as everybody in town meeting has over the last year. We're going back and forth to see what we can do better. And we don't always agree. And sometimes the compromises are what have to be made, as this gentleman said before too. It's working for the betterment of everybody in the town.
So I can't visualize right here this scenario and how it would have a negative impact. But what I would encourage, Chris, is all of our residential study group meetings are public meetings, open to the public. The building inspector is there. Please come and talk with us about what your concerns are with it, and then, or talk to Michael Byrne, and and maybe then we can figure out how to address these concerns.
Well, I appreciate that. I think all your meetings are during the workday, which doesn't really lend itself to public
They go both ways.
participation. But
Some are in the
I
morning,
would
some are in
ask
the
that
evening.
you post all of your analysis to a website to allow the public to look at it. I appreciate the intent to take a scalpel. I would ask you adopt the Hippocratic Oath and first do no harm, because I think that's really what's happening here.
Yeah, Chris, we've
So,
really tried not to do any harm, but to try to
Well, I
bring
think
it forward. And some of our meetings are in the evening. They flip-flop both ways. We have a member that can't meet in the morning. Our meeting minutes are posted online. So, I'd be happy to talk with you. Maybe you could talk to Michael Byrne too.
I really see, there's been a long-standing tradition of this town not to have parking in the.
I think that's enough. I think you've
And
said your
and
piece.
you're promoting it.
Thank you, Chris.
Sir,
Thank
this
you
is a
for
public hearing. I really wish
You've said
you
your
would
piece, and now
allow
you're
the
being
public to
confrontational
speak.
with the proponent.
The proponent.
I've allowed you the proponent.
Sir,
I've allowed you
sir.
the opportunity to speak.
Sir, I'm not here to debate the proponent. A public hearing, your board should be listening and then deciding. You shouldn't even be discussing what your opinion is before you've heard the public. I mean, this is not Washington. You're not doing a hearing for a Supreme Court justice where you're performing. You're supposed to listen, consider, and make a decision. So please do that. I won't say any more. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I might just say
Go
one
ahead,
thing.
Steve.
We have listened to the public. We sent out surveys to over 800 people that were directly affected by the new construction over the past 2 to 3 years. We asked significant questions. We asked for their feedback. This group made the decision that we were not going to make decisions on people's lives in the town of Arlington based upon just a few suggestions from last year. We went, we talked to people, we had site visits, and over 800 surveys, and a large portion were sent back to us. We're looking at those studies now, we're looking at the reports, what they've responded, and that's what we're addressing, how it's really affected people. Not just someone that's always has concerns with zoning bylaws and so forth, but how it's affected people's life. And those are the people that we're bettering in the town.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? Seeing none.
I move to support Article 8, to endorse Article 8 as amended. Zoning bylaw amendment, residential driveway parking accommodation, and zoning changes.
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have ayes from down the table. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Moving on, continued public hearing for Article 9. zoning bylaw amendment for medical marijuana treatment center buffer zone. We'll move directly into public comment on this. Before we do that, I do want to make a statement. There has been a lot of discussion over the last several weeks. We've received a significant amount of public comment, which was made available to the people who are in attendance tonight. I am going to allow for additional public comment. I would ask that any comments be kept solely to the merits of a buffer zone. We heard, as I said, a wide array of testimony last week. We met with Chief Ryan and Director Bongiorno the week before regarding this. I would ask the proponent to step forward and have a seat. Please step forward.
Karen Thomas Allier.
Thank you. And bring us up to speed on where we are.
So I think we agreed last week that there were some questions to ask of the town council, and I believe he has answered those questions. I received a phone call from him this morning to that effect. So there was some question as to whether a yes vote is needed from the ARB to move this forward to town meeting, and he responded that indeed a yes vote is needed from the ARB because there was a warrant on a similar topic last fall. There was also a reiteration of the fact that when town meeting passed the zoning in 2014 for limiting medical marijuana facilities to B3 plus B5, that was done under the understanding that the state buffer zone would apply. So Council Heim reiterated that. So the intention of the motion at hand is to put back what the state unwantedly took away from us, right? So Arlington had a buffer zone and wanted a buffer zone to be included within the B3 plus B5 zoning, and the state took that away from us, and we're just trying to put that back. And in addition, what we are putting back is a clarification of what is meant by places where children commonly congregate, since that is quite vague. So we have defined that to be preschools and schools, both public and private, and athletic fields.
That is, what you're referring to is not the original recommended vote that you presented, but a substitute.
Correct.
Put forth by the Board of Health.
Correct. So what we are requesting is that the board vote for the substitute motion, which falls within the scope of the warrant that I submitted in January. Mm-hmm. So the warrant submitted in January had additional restrictions in it. It would have restricted medical marijuana dispensaries to not be within 500 feet of libraries, pediatricians, and sports schools, including dance schools and the like. The revised buffer zone and I guess I should say the revisions came about after discussions over the course of several weeks with the Board of Health, and I understand that the Director of Health also spoke with others within town about the matter. So at any rate, the revisions are entirely within scope of the January proposed warrant, and therefore we're all good to proceed with a substitute motion. There's no additional restrictions placed within the revised buffer.
Questions, comments from the public? Mr.
Bob, for those who want more. I was at town meeting last year when this came up. I really thought we had a 500-foot buffer, and I was a little concerned because the library was within that. So some people say it wasn't, it's misunderstood or whatever, but it was clearly my impression and the impression of others around me that it was, we were voting with something with a 500-foot buffer.
Other questions, comments?
My name's Sophia.
Name and full name and address,
Sophia
please.
Feig, I'm at 24 Avon Place. I just don't really understand why this buffer zone is so important for something that's in the law, be dispensing medicine to very ill people. I don't see how it's different from the CVS pharmacy or any doctor's offices that we already have. I don't understand what the concern is about it being near places where people, children congregate. I honestly don't understand it.
Okay. You can answer that.
So the state law that was passed had a buffer zone in it.
No, I understand
So-
all that.
So we're
I
putting
understand all
back
that.
the buffer zone that was eliminated through mistake by the town.
Well, it wasn't eliminated by mistake by the town. It was, the discussion heading into 2014 town meeting was, that time, the state, I believe, had a automatic
I've
buffer
read
zone
that whole thing. I know all that
implemented
history.
by there. The state changed its mind
Yes.
at some point in the last year.
Yeah.
It's not a mistake by the town.
No, I know that.
It's a change in direction from
And I guess to address your point, this has been debated at length over many meetings about
Yeah.
what's the difference between a medical marijuana dispensary and a CVS. I think there's some obvious differences. Right now, federal law makes marijuana dispensaries illegal by federal law. So if you'll let me finish
I
for a
will let
second.
you finish.
Okay, so,
Just make
so,
it bigger.
sorry, I speak slowly.
It's okay.
So they can't get bank accounts, so they have to operate cash only. So at any given time, a medical marijuana dispensary will have upwards of like $100,000 on cash. And actually, if you look through the reports of how these things have been going, in some states, every single marijuana dispensary has been robbed within the past year. So they're real hot spots for crime because they have so much cash on hand. So that's one reason why they're different from a CVS. The other reason is that they sell only one product, only marijuana. A CVS, even the drugstore component, mostly sells heart medicine, antibiotics. Their main product is not opium. So that's another big difference between the two. And we've had this discussion so many times, and I'm realizing what it is. There are some things where you're not going to change a person's mind. So I'm not going to change your mind, and you're not going to change my mind. And I think what it comes down to is trust, right? I mean, in my experience, I've lived in a couple places that were pretty heavily into drug use. I lived in Berkeley. I spent some time in the neighborhood of Harvard Square, and I've seen what can happen to a neighborhood when things go wrong with drug policy.
Can I say something now?
So,
Because
no, I'm
Please allow her to finish.
Okay.
So I've seen things go wrong, and in my mind, I'm really concerned that things are going to go wrong here. And in your mind, you believe that there's no way anything
Don't
could
say
go
what I
wrong.
believe.
Sure, but at any rate, some people, and we've heard this opinion expressed by the board as well, they're convinced that nothing wrong is going to happen. And I think what we need to do is respect that some people have concerns. You might not share the concerns, but you can respect them. We're going to vote about whether to require vegetated buffers between houses, because that's a matter of respect for people. We're going to vote on a lot of things to require neighborhoods to be a certain way, because it's a matter of respect for the people in those neighborhoods. And so you may not share my belief, but please respect my desire not to have to walk by a medical marijuana dispensary the 3 or 4 times a week I walk by an area on the way to drop my kids off at school. Maybe it doesn't bother you. It bothers me, and I live in this town too.
Can I say something now?
You can respond, please.
Thanks, because I actually just wrote something, and I'm just going to read it because it's succinct, and I think that part of the thing is that what you're describing is, illegal drug use, which I'm not in favor of, but what the point that's at question is a legal medical marijuana dispensary that is in our state law, and that's not an illegal thing. And so I'm just going to say this. So there seems to be some confusion from my reading about this and the discussion in town between medical marijuana treatment centers and marijuana dispensaries that would dispense marijuana for recreational use. General Law, Chapter 369, an act for the humanitarian medical use of marijuana outlines several guidelines for medical marijuana treatment centers, including they have to be nonprofits licensed by the state. They may only dispense to patients who have been diagnosed by their doctor as having a debilitating disease that requires marijuana therapy. Some examples of disease, as given in the law, include cancer, glaucoma, positive status for human immunodeficiency virus, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, hepatitis C, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, Crohn's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and those are only the ones that they mentioned in the law. Could be other ones. The patients must carry a personal identification or registration card issued by the Department of Public Health. And the medicine is taken at home, just as anyone who picks up prescription medicine at a pharmacy uses it as prescribed at home. It's not like we're opening an opium den here. It appears that they are very well regulated with clearly drawn guidelines, and yeah, I don't see what the risk is. I know that one was approved at Water Street, where there's a, who's going to even know it's in there? It's not like they're going to have a neon sign out front. And to go a step further, I think that we need to continue to work to remove the stigma around marijuana for medical use, as it is a therapy that has been shown to be extremely helpful where other therapies are not for people who suffer from many debilitating conditions. I really think that that's being forgotten in this discussion. I mean, it's really, so yeah, I'm not going to agree with you, and I hope that you would respect my opinion as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're not eliminating the possibility of RMDs from the town. I don't know if you've seen the
No,
map.
I know
There's
that.
still space for them.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I have that map. There doesn't really look like there is space. That's what it seems like.
No,
This
there's
warrant article
space.
effectively makes it impossible to have a medical marijuana dispensary in the town. It's just such a huge onus to not have it near any place where children congregate. And that's ultimately my question. What is this concern about children congregating? It still feels like something reefer madness from the 50s to me. I don't understand what people are concerned about. I honestly
may I share with you what I'm concerned about?
Yes, I would love to
Please
know.
please respect
Yes,
each other. Both of
absolutely.
you.
I'm totally
Or
I
I will-
really do want to hear. I want to understand that concern.
So we've heard statistics presented over the past several weeks that it is much easier to get a medical marijuana card than what you just listed. There have been several doctors who have had their licenses removed because they were giving marijuana cards to anybody who
We're not here to litigate the appropriateness of medical marijuana in town. That has already been approved and
but she
allowed.
asked what the concern
I would
was,
encourage you
and
to
I
have
answered her
that
question.
discussion, which is out of scope of the article that you've presented, outside or
Okay,
over
well
the
then-
telephone. And
then
I
all
do
of-
respect your opinion.
Then
and
all
your-
of her questions were out
but
of scope, and I'll address them outside.
I allowed for a conversation, and now it's
Okay.
spiraling out too far. We're not here to discuss that. We're here to discuss the appropriateness and validity of a buffer zone under the conditions that you've brought to us.
Exactly.
Thank you. And I would ask the same of any other speaker in the crowd. Any other facility is not an appropriate discussion. The appropriateness of medical marijuana treatment centers in town is not appropriate. That's an issue that's already
Been
been
decided.
argued and decided. It's settled.
Yeah.
So please, other comments, questions? Mr.
Chair,
O'Reilly.
just a question. Would you ask any speakers, or if any speakers here are speaking on behalf of the proponents of the Water Street facility, either from remuneration or not?
That's out of scope.
No. You don't want-
That's a completely unfair question.
I'm not going to debate you. I think it's.
I think it's
in
totally
the-
irrelevant. If you have a point, I'm happy to hear it. I'm happy to let you
Oh,
continue
yeah,
to speak.
my point is, and this has been recognized in the city of Boston in particular, where there are people who, go to public hearings as if they're from the public, but they're really being paid by the proponents of whoever.
We're not going to go
board.
down that road, Mr. Loretti. If you have a point about the
Well,
buffer
that
zone,
was the point.
we'll talk about the buffer zone.
Okay, good.
Anything else is out of scope, but I've had it. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enough.
Wow.
Enough.
I'm asking for
That's really
privately.
rude.
I'm
That's
asking
really
for
rude.
It's an
I've
extreme-
lived in
you're-
this town for 20 some odd
Enough,
years.
both of you. Take it
Oh.
outside. If you have a private conversation, please
I will. No, I'm happy to go out.
be respectful of the other people in the room.
Talk to him.
I have given this a significant amount of thought over the last several months, and particularly over the last week. I'm still not comfortable with the idea of a buffer zone. We've heard a lot of talk going back a couple of weeks to the meeting with Chief Ryan, and everything that's been put forward as a reason to put a buffer zone in place isn't solved by the idea of a buffer zone. So, my inclination would be, on the one hand, putting in place potentially has the effect of zoning our medical marijuana treatment centers out of town. I've seen your map. I know those areas. I don't think that those are appropriate. I don't think that those are possible sites for additional MMTCs in town. My concern is that the buffer zone, in concert with the size and dimensions of the town of Arlington, is unfairly restrictive. I would recommend, on my own, not as chair, a vote of no action on your warrant article. I am, however, of the mind that this should go to town meeting, given that town meeting had the idea that voting in buffer zones in 2014, and due to no fault of this board, no fault of anyone other than the state, really, that has changed. What I would recommend would be a study group to become in place to approach the idea of how to handle medical marijuana in town now that it's been zoned. And yes, there has been a site approved and permitted by our board, by the Board of Selectmen, and by the state. But to address more the underlying issues that I think are the cause of what brought you here in the beginning. I don't know that zoning is an appropriate remedy for those things. I'm concerned, we've already limited these districts, these facilities to B3 and B5. There's a limited number of spaces where they can go. And given the commercial space in Arlington as it stands now, there's an even further limited option of appropriate buildings, appropriate offices, appropriate sites for these to be put into. I think the effect of a buffer zone, like I said, would zone those out. I would like to see what other controls might exist, what other recommendations might exist to deal with things like diversion, which was talked about by Chief Ryan and by you, and allowing things to get down the line from someone who does have a card to someone who doesn't necessarily have a card. I'm also concerned about where and when legally purchased items are used. That's not something that a buffer zone is going to cure. I think we need to take a hard look at the town and the way that the town is shaped and the way the town is zoned. We need to look at some of the other effects that medical marijuana has on communities, recognizing that it is a medical facility and that it is for people who are suffering from serious illnesses in most cases. And we need to take a look at how the town can implement certain policies and procedures. I'm not convinced that a buffer zone is it. I was on this board in 2014 when it was discussed. My recollection is that it was presented as something that came with the territory. Now that we find out that it's not, and we have an option to look a little bit deeper, that's where my mind has gone and where my thoughts have come from. So, Ken.
I would kind of concur. I would concur with what you said. I do want to state a quote from. I think this is attached.
Yes.
From our attorney, town council. He says, if a buffer zone was approved, if a buffer zone were approved, which would likely prove that there are no locations in Arlington where RMD could feasibly be located, such a zoning bylaw would be susceptible to legal challenge. That to me is an issue that.
But there's places where it could go.
No.
That's not exactly how that works.
Okay. So I do bring this up, and I have some concerns about that. And I am very interested in your proposal of setting up some sort of group where we can find a mutually beneficial way of reading some of these, because I hear what you're saying, I hear what she's saying. Is there another way of doing it besides through zoning that would allow us to address these issues?
And so just to go back for a second, I hope I'm not interrupting. I looked back at the zoning effort that went into the articles that were put forth for 2014, and I was actually able to find the presentation that was made in front of town meeting. I'm happy to email that to anybody that would like to see it. But during the winter, prior to this, there was a working group, I'm just reading straight from it, a working group was comprised of the town manager, chief of police, town council, director of inspectional services, director of health and human services, director of planning and community development, and the chair of the ARB discussed recommendations for zoning medical marijuana treatment centers, which is how they came to B3 and B5. I don't know what kind of follow-on has taken place since then. And I think that should potentially be revived with some input from residents who have some concern about how these will operate moving forward in other areas of the town. And I will send that to you.
Respond. So, when I watched the video of your hearing in October about the warrant proposed by the marijuana industry, you gave almost the exact same comments at that time. You said, we need to study this more, we need to come up with a better buffer zone. And that was in October. And as of January this year, nothing had been proposed, no working group had been formed. And that was the reason why I put forward the buffer zone warrant, because nothing had happened. And I sent you email and I called and I said, can we discuss, can we get your input? What would you like to see in a buffer zone? And you said nothing. And so now I'm just wondering if this is a delay tactic. I mean, I don't mean to be harsh here, but that's just what's going through my mind, is you said this before and did nothing.
My feelings on buffer zones have been put out in these meetings. I think they're security theater. I don't think they go to addressing the underlying problems that you're looking at, that the chief of police has mentioned is out there, that the Department of, the Board of Health has mentioned. I think it creates a stigma to people who have other medical issues. And I think it creates an idea that these are places not to travel and not to go. And I think that sets a bad precedent for what really is at its core a medical facility. Okay. I'll let the others speak.
Yeah, the state provided eventually the 500-foot buffer, but also said unless communities establish their own local siting requirements, any local regulations regarding siting void the statutory buffer zone. So I understand the confusion that came about, but the town did move to establish the B5, the B5 and B3 zones with special permit. And that's what led to the Water Street facility location. And that was vetted by police, building department, and the ARB by us very extensively.
Selectmen and the Board of Health.
Selectmen, the Board of Health. So what I'm seeing is, and what this map shows, is when this 500-foot restriction is applied to our town, our small town, and our geography, it really amounts to an elimination or a zoning out of medical marijuana facilities. They have to be, distanced from all child care functions. The remaining locations outside of the buffer zone may also turn out to be kid-related functions. I looked at your map and began to realize, and even looked at it very carefully, and began to realize that that really is the case. This is a warrant article about eliminating medical marijuana from the town of Arlington, not about location of allowing medical marijuana facilities, which was approved by the town. For instance, I looked at the one over by Playtime. So you've got Playtime there, you've got the, across the street from that is what I heard was a Ready Set Kids Family Enrichment Center. It's a registered family teaching facility. So that area's gone. If I look at the one down on Pleasant, or as you go into Route 3, Medford Street, that's listed as a family and children state facility. I don't know, maybe that's okay. It's next to Winston Towers and the Arlington Housing Authority. Another one is down by the Capitol Theater, but that's a kid-friendly area too. So
what about the ones in the Heights? What's wrong with
the ones
those?
in the Heights, there's one by Wanamaker's, and there's one across the street from that, and then there's one up by the bus station.
Yeah.
So this is a very
What's
limited.
What's wrong with those?
Well, because look at your map. I mean, you don't even, the squint test tells you, you're pretty much saying there's nothing much left in the town.
That Arlington has a high population density of childcare facilities is
right.
what you got from this.
Right. So, and it's a great kid-friendly town,
Yeah.
but the town voted to approve medical marijuana facilities in its town.
And I haven't ruled them out entirely. I'm
You
trying to
have
protect-
basically ruled them out. This is a de facto
But why don't you let the
elimination.
people of this town vote on it? I mean, when you
Well-
say the people that you've talked to, I realize that the people in town government are sick of this issue, and I understand that you've debated it for years. But I have yet to meet a single parent who's aware of what's going on. And every parent that I meet, that I've said, so I'm just saying, of the parents that I meet, there's a large population of this town that is not aware
Yeah.
of what's happening. I realize you're saying
Andrew,
your hands are
can I
tied,
finish?
but,
I know.
but
You can finish,
Yeah,
Andy.
well, why don't you, you kind of jumped in on me, but,
I'm
so
sorry.
the town voted for medical marijuana facilities. This bill, this warrant, is saying there shall be none.
no, it's not.
It basically
saying that.
is.
That's not the intention.
De
of the
facto,
warrant.
it is saying that. In
You're reading
reality,
something
But
into the warrant,
even
something
if
it's
that's
not
not the
intended
intent,
to do.
in reality, that's what it's saying.
even if that's
No.
not the intent, the function of the bill, the way it's written, and the way that the map is laid out, zones these out functionally.
And they're going fast. One of them you have on here couldn't even exist.
Yeah. And that,
If you
that
look at Ready
creates an
Set Kids,
additional-
which is a registered family, kid-friendly thing. I like the kid-friendly thing. My two daughters grew up here. I like all of that, but I also, we're a board that has to be cognizant of what the town has asked for. And this is not about eliminating medical marijuana. That's a different kind of warrant that you didn't propose. This is about a buffer zone, what's appropriate for the town. So I want to say I approve of what you're saying, Andrew, but I don't think this is the way to do it. In fact, the one that was approved at Water Street may be an ideal location where the police could see it, they vetted it, everybody looked at it. This could be exactly where you want to have it, but that's completely eliminated by this methodology. So I don't think you're saying what you're proposing, but I don't think that's exactly what you're doing. You're basically saying, let's eliminate these facilities from the town.
So you're reading words that are not there.
I'm reading a map,
I'm saying let's
and I
not.
visited these sites,
I'm
and they're
saying that
going very
people that
fast.
walk their kids to preschool don't want to have to walk by a medical marijuana facility because we don't believe that every customer is a legitimate customer.
Then the warrant should be to eliminate medical
No.
marijuana facilities,
No,
which
the
I don't
purpose
think
of
is
the
the scope
warrant
of
is
this
so
board.
that people who walk their kids to preschool don't want to have to walk by a medical marijuana facility. And that's what the warrant says, and that's what the warrant means.
I don't think it means that, but let me pass it on.
continue, David.
I disagree.
So I've been listening carefully to the comments here, and also reading the comments that have been submitted to us. And, you know, having been on town meeting when this was voted on, and I know what I believed was the case when I voted for the zoning change to allow medical marijuana facilities. About the state, the buffer zone in state law. being in existence. And then subsequent to that vote, the state changed its interpretation, making the action the town meeting had taken one that effectively removed any buffer zone. So I understand that, and so my having been one of those people who voted on it, and my gut reaction was, well, we thought there was a buffer zone. There should be a buffer zone. But I've been looking at very thoughtful comments made on from different perspectives, and I wouldn't say there's even a pro and a con side here. There are a multitude of perspectives here on what the issues are and what the priorities are, and I think we've seen a successful example, or at least what the board believes was a successful example for the most part, with the residential study group in bringing disparate views together to figure out a way forward. So I appreciate the chair's suggestion that perhaps we should bring the different viewpoints together to get a better idea of what the underlying issues are that are driving this concern over buffer zones. But at the same time, I do have a concern that for whatever period of time that takes, that perhaps we need to guard against there being additional medical marijuana facilities moving through the process before we come to grips with these issues that are swirling around us. And perhaps there's nothing that can be done about the Water Street facility. That location is approved, and some in town believe that wouldn't have happened if the buffer zone they believed was in place had existed. That may or may not be the case for that location, but I'd like the board to consider approving a version of the buffer zone analogous to what is in the state law that town meeting believed was in place as a stopgap measure, so that the same problem doesn't occur before we have a solution to it, and also still convene a study group bringing together the various viewpoints to figure out whether a different buffer zone or no buffer zone or something entirely different from zoning is the way forward. We have the language that was in state law. I'd like to consider perhaps we can do both things. Both let town meeting consider reinstating the buffer zone that members in 2014 believed was in place, while at the same time creating a study group to examine the underlying issues that are concerning everyone.
So with the revised language, we tried to do pretty much exactly what you said. We tried to use the language from the state law, so it was the same 500 foot, the same way of measuring, the same covering all public and private schools. And the problem with the state law was this places where children commonly congregate, right, is vague. And so then we tried to define that as being athletic fields. So I think we've done what you asked for.
Well, I understand you were trying that you were trying to bring more definition to what is a somewhat vague term, but that definition as it existed and still exists in state law is what town meeting was looking at in 2014 and believed existed. And I'm essentially talking about, if that's what we consider the baseline for town meetings deliberations at that point, perhaps what we can do is offer town meeting the opportunity to bring back that baseline and then continue the conversation from there.
So you'd prefer to have the ambiguous baseline rather than I mean, the buffer zone that we're proposing is more narrowly defined than the state, right? Because instead of having vague places where children commonly congregate, we just say athletic fields.
I understand, but again, I'm trying to find a balance because I hear competing interests, I hear competing data, and I'm thinking if we can bring back the baseline that we thought existed, the conversation can continue. There won't be any, if another medical marijuana facility is proposed and begins to go through the process, then a buffer zone would definitively exist and be part of that deliberation in the meantime. And then in the future, at a future town meeting, if the study group were to recommend additional changes, then they could do that. And that could mean making changes to the buffer zone. That could mean repealing the buffer zone. That could be doing something entirely unrelated to buffer zones that deals with some of the the other issues like diversion of medical marijuana and some of the other issues that have been raised in the public hearing and public comment. But I think I would like to move this issue forward to town meeting to consider, and I feel like that may be the fairest way to do it.
What is required to start a working group? Does that also require a vote from town meeting?
Jenny?
I don't believe so, no. I don't think so.
The residential study group was
Well,
specific
that was
response to a specific issue. Study groups can be created by
Yeah.
committees, boards, without significant effort. As long as there are people willing to participate, they're always up.
Yeah. But I do think if we were going to move a version of this along to town meeting, I would want town meeting to know that our intention was that there also be a study group to continue working on the issue.
The underlying concern, part of this, is does putting that forward open the town up to any kind of litigation to either define the buffer zone, or define language from the state that we would now adopt? Does it affect, I don't believe it affects the Water Street facility, but to the extent it might, is there a chance for opening the town up to litigation on that front? And are there any projects in the pipeline? Obviously, we would have no idea of those so far, but staff might, that would be potentially affected by that.
I'm not aware of any impact to potential projects, so I can't answer that question specifically.
I mean, I defer to town council on the risk of opening the town up to legal challenges with respect to the Water Street facility. I mean,
That was actually, that was answered in his memo to you about the legal issues, and that was what Kim
Okay.
raised in the beginning.
So, I mean, my interpretation of that, I didn't want to speak for the town council, but my interpretation of that was that nothing we can do here would impact the Water Street facility.
Well, so, one point you made in your remarks just now was that it's already permitted, 11 Water Street. It has not received a permit. That particular RMD has not received a permit from the Board of Health, just to be clear, so that it's not, it's a permitted facility. It is not finished with the local permitting process. So that was all I wanted to clarify.
The other concern I have is looking at the map, and Andy's, the way Andy spoke about these things, his testimony, is just putting this forward anyway, zone out everything de facto, and then how do you come back and step back from that 6 months, 9 months
That's what
later?
I'm wondering. Particularly when the state law says, or the town community establish their own local siting requirements, or void the statutory buffer zone, including basic zoning. So they're saying that the town has can have a responsibility to make its own determination that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Because every town, the big towns, potentially this much gray area wouldn't affect them. But in a town as small as ours, it does basically say, we're zoning it out.
Yeah, I mean,
We are the only town that I know of in the state of Massachusetts that doesn't have a buffer zone.
Yeah, but towns are different sizes and shapes.
I also
It's not a
believe
numbers game,
some of the other communities have a mechanism for seeking a waiver of the buffer zone, which this wouldn't have. So in a situation where technically a proposed facility might not be allowed because of a buffer zone requirement, if there were other factors in play that had the protective effect, if there is one, of a buffer zone, then a waiver could be granted for that location. And I'd be more comfortable with something that on its face is very restrictive. If it at least had some sort of waiver provision in it, or waiver mechanism. But the proposal before us, unfortunately, doesn't. And I don't think that can be added within the scope of this warrant
I
article.
don't believe that can be added in because it's outside of the scope of the original warrant language, so we'd have to revisit.
But there was a town mentioned in one of these letters, Watertown, I think, that had that.
And
And
I've
that's
previously
something-
provided, excuse me, if I might.
Go ahead.
I've previously provided the chart, the chart that shows you what other communities in Massachusetts have done in terms of the zones.
And that's something that I would be supportive of if a buffer zone were deemed necessary, where there were some sort of process. If a facility had previously been cited and wanted to move, open up another facility, if there would be some sort of criteria that would allow for that waiver. But
Well, or if we agreed to buffer zones that, on paper look okay now, but due to changes of protected facilities, either opening in previously non-buffered locations or moving their locations, and that there would be a mechanism so that we weren't at risk for entirely zoning medical marijuana out of the town.
yeah. That's something that would make sense. Go ahead, Gene.
I have a few observations. I guess my first observation is the Watertown facility was vetted by lots of parts of the town, as I understand it,
Water
at least.
Street.
Water Street, I'm sorry, Water Street. Chief of Police, this board. It doesn't have a Board of Health permit yet, but we understand that's going to be happening fairly soon. So that seemed to be as good a location as could be found in the town, but this warrant article would not have allowed it to go there. And that...
So I think your understanding is a little
Let me
incomplete.
can I
Okay.
finish? And then, sure. And so one of my concerns is, here's a facility that found a place that seemed to be acceptable, and now with this warrant article, it couldn't have been there. What that says to me is there's something overly broad about the buffer zones as they've been conceptualized in this warrant article, along with the fact that there may not be any other place to put one in town that's really realistic.
Could
So,
I please address that? I'd like to hear the rest of your comments, but I really have to address that. So, because when I hear what's being said in these meetings and when I look at the videos of previous meetings, the thinking has really changed over time. So when I hear the videos of the previous meetings, there's a lot of angst at the fact that, you know, when this facility applied, there wasn't a preschool in operation for about 10 months' time. At that time, that was when the medical marijuana applicant filed their application. And then a preschool did open. And when you listen to the videos of those meetings, people are saying, oh my God, this is terrible.
But maybe
We
the
thought-
preschool shouldn't have opened if they knew the medical marijuana place was coming in next door.
You're right. And you know what? No one told the preschool that there was a medical marijuana facility. I've talked with the preschool director, and she's really upset that no one told her about this, right? So you're right. Someone should have told her, and no one did. But she's there now. What do? It's a big problem. She's there now.
So, you know, I think these are, you know, everything that's come up tonight almost has been things that people feel about sincerely. They're very heartfelt. They're very important to everyone. And they have some clashes going on between them. In this case, I feel for what you're saying. I think it's important. The other meetings and the meetings we had with the Board of Health Director and the Chief of Police weren't completely compelling about why there needed to be a buffer zone of 500 feet around each one of the facilities. Considering, as this person talked about, who uses the facilities, how they're supposed to use them. They can't just go outside and start eating brownies or smoking marijuana or something like that. I think there probably should be a way for the town to regulate these that does not necessarily involve 500-foot buffer zones. It may be working with the Board of Health to see about what powers they have as a Board of Health. They can't zone and they can't create buffer zones, but they do have a lot of powers of boards of health in doing things. You know, maybe we need buffer zones with waivers under certain circumstances and figure out what they are. Maybe we need an overlay district for medical marijuana facilities. I don't know. I just think that this is too broad, and just sending it to town meeting sends the message that this is the next step to take, when I really think the next step is not this. I think the next step is to step back and say, can the town come up with something better than a 500-foot buffer zone around every place where children congregate that gets you what you want and make sure that these facilities can serve the people that they really need to serve? So I guess I agree with our chair that the answer is not to recommend this, but instead to say let's form a study group with the Board of Health and the Chief of Police and try to work this out in a way that gives us something that's more rational than what I think the state just put in, so there was something there. And when the town chose to limit where it could go, enacted zoning, it basically gave up the 500 feet. So I think we can come up with something better. That's where I am on it.
And what about Mr. Watson's position that we at least revert back to what the town voted for in 2014, which was very carefully debated at the time, that it wasn't B3 plus B5 with no buffer zone. It was B3 plus B5 with a buffer zone, was what the town voted for, or what the town meeting voted for.
I think we have an independent obligation to take a look, and while that's a really legitimate thing to do, I think it's also legitimate for us to say to town meeting, you know, give us some time to come up with something better.
Well, and then, I don't mean to be challenging here, but
That's
Y'all said the
okay.
same thing in October and nothing happened. So what's different this time? How do I believe you that you're actually gonna do something this time?
I think it's a step that needs to be taken, and I'm happy to work with you and Jenny on setting something up, determining the appropriate people to be involved, figuring out a meeting schedule, a working group.
We can continue the discussion depending upon what happens next.
I mean, what assurance do I have that this isn't just a smoke and mirrors, just put it off and let nothing happen?
Well, I think we've heard from the town that, I think we've heard from people that have weighed in on this warrant article that they'd like to see something. And I'm prepared to be responsive to that and work with people who've expressed concerns and work with people who have the power to enforce certain things, rather than throw up a buffer zone and throw up our hands to follow away from that.
Well, but-
We've heard the comments, and I can keep in mind that we're all volunteers with day jobs and families and children, but based on what I've heard, I think it's clear that something needs to be done. The underlying concerns that I've heard have nothing to do with putting a 500, they're nothing that a 500-foot buffer zone would stop. And so my thinking is let's pull back on where we are now, table that idea, and look at the underlying concerns that people have and try to figure out how we can begin to address those. Safety of children is something which I obviously am extremely concerned. I don't think a 500-foot buffer zone does anything to make anybody any safer.
So if we're agreeing that the ultimate solution is a study group to come up with something better, then what do we want as our stopgap measure in the meantime? Nothing, or something that's too protective?
I prefer nothing. I think something that's too protective is a risk to the town.
So to be clear,
Nothing is.
nothing is talking about 11 Water Street. Nothing in this warrant says anything about, getting rid of grandfathering. There are places on this map where.
I understand that you believe that those places are appropriate sites for medical marijuana
Honestly, I
dispensaries.
think this one is
None of-
great. It's
none of
across
those
the street
sites.
from an old folks home. There's like a dog food store and, there's no children's stuff around it anywhere.
I think you're making the point,
Yeah.
that it has to be a bigger picture. So let's commit to, the things you brought up are heartfelt, and we all have children and feel that safety is really important. So I think we will commit to fostering this committee, but not to going against the mission of the town, and I think implementing something which is just passing the buck to the town in a very irresponsible way, I
Well,
believe.
it's irresponsible either way, right? I mean,
No,
you're
I think
saying
it's-
you're saying that I should trust you, that if a
Yes.
dispensary comes in and wants to open up next to Casa Esme, that you won't let it
No,
happen.
I won't guarantee you where it's gonna happen, but I guarantee you it will be thought about by the whole town.
The
But
other thing that I think is important to mention is something that Jean touched on, and the way the Water Street facility was cited set a precedent for other companies that want to come into town and do business here. It's not, opening a medical marijuana treatment center is not an as-of right thing. You can't open someplace across the street just because you got the cash and the connections. It's set up, there's an extensive permitting process with the Board of Selectmen. They do go through review with the Chief of Police. They do go through a special permit process with us. They
Right.
go through a process with the Board of Health. They go through a process with the state. All of these things have to be accomplished before they're fully licensed and allowed to open.
And-
I'm comfortable with allowing that process to remain in place until we can figure out a better way to solve these
Right,
problems.
EDR, the special permit process, is appropriateness to the neighborhood, effect on the neighborhood, is it an appropriate use? Those are powerful vehicles that the town has given the Arlington Redevelopment Board. That's what we do. So we want
But
to use those in order to, and I think that's the way to do it, not to, I think this would be an impediment, actually, this kind of big buffer zone thing that basically is a de facto elimination of RMDs.
But so you said that the 11 Water Street facility is allowed because they filed their application at a time when there was no preschool in operation. So for that reason, it became grandfathered in. Now, if we have no buffer zone in place and a facility files an application to be next door to Casa Esme, they will similarly be grandfathered in, regardless of what buffer zone we pass in the future.
Remember, the state said unless communities establish their own local siting requirements.
But we haven't.
That's what, I think we want to do
So,
that
but
based on a,
But in the meantime, we have, I'm sorry, I know you're running late.
That's okay. It's a good point. But also I want to say that, yes, a daycare center did happen to open after they applied for their permit. But at that point in time, they didn't just pick that site just because it was, they want to pick that site. Selectmen had went through and said, that's an appropriate site. Police chief went through and said, that's an appropriate site.
The police chief now says have a buffer zone.
No. The police chief did weigh in on saying that was an appropriate site because it was near the police stations, near public. This is what we had talked about at that. It was near businesses where people keep an eye on each other. It's better to have it in an open space where it's not in a back alley somewhere.
It's easily accessible by law enforcement, was
Yes.
one of the reasons they gave to us.
Yes, and so they did weigh in on it. They didn't just go right by their desk. They looked at that site and weighed in on it. And I trust them, okay? I trust them to do the same thing for any future projects, okay? I trust the selectmen to look into this the same way. Is it suitable for that neighborhood? Is it suitable for that area? Is it suitable for the town? And hopefully you trust us too, because we really do care. I have been struggling with this for a long time. And it's been a very...
I mean, I think the 11 Water Street facility is totally inappropriate, but as you've said, that's out of scope for today's meeting. And y'all have completely lost my trust because you approved it. Sorry, that's
okay.
just the honest situation.
We
So,
can-
and so given that you've lost my trust because you approved a facility in a place that's completely inappropriate, how do I trust you to not do the same thing again? I put this buffer zone in front of you.
I think you've heard our answer as to the buffer
Yeah.
zone, but, as I said, I'm comfortable with the process that exists until we can find a way to better approach the concerns that I think you have. I did see a comment in the back.
I'll pass.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask one question
You may.
and this is to the board itself. As Mr. West said, it really is up to the town to decide what it wants to do with the buffer zone. And in fact, your board made that decision and town meeting ratified it in 2014, when you said the town would adopt the state buffer zone. Yes, that's exactly what happened. If the state had not changed the interpretation of its own regulation, and now to say that it doesn't believe the town has a buffer zone, if they had not done that, for this town meeting, would your board, the Redevelopment Board, be putting forth an article to eliminate the state buffer zone that was adopted in 2000?
I can't answer that hypothetical.
Could you ask that to the board?
No. If they want to answer, they may, but
I think the community should establish its own local siting requirements as part of Article 4. That's just as much part of it as the 500-foot buffer. We have that opportunity. Maybe it could have happened faster, but I don't think that's a problem. You want to pick the 500-foot buffer, but it also says...
No, all I'm saying is what the state did is originally they said if the community doesn't have a buffer zone, then the state buffer zone applies, and that was the basis for the 2004 vote at town meeting.
I think you
What
should
you're looking at is what they changed it to last summer, and then they said, well, because you have already zoned these facilities in the B3 but B5 zoning district, you have local siting requirements, therefore you don't have a buffer zone.
Article 4. Okay.
So
Agree to
what
disagree
you're
on
reading
that.
is the current interpretation, but it's new. It was new this summer.
Yeah, that's the interpretation of town council. Thank you. Anything else from members of the public? Is there any further discussion to be had? Do you have any on the board?
Can I request that you take two votes? One for the suggestion made by Mr. Watson?
We can only vote on the article in front of us, but if there's if someone wishes to amend the vote and make a motion, I'm happy to do it.
Well, I'll make a motion that we amend the current proposal to mirror what's in state law and send that to town meeting. I don't know exactly how to phrase that technically.
Andy, can I see what you have?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the CMR. That's this. That's the Doug's.
So essentially, what that would be an amendment, correct me if I'm wrong, to amend the proposed vote before us to mirror 725 CMR 110A14, restricting RMVs from being sited within 500 feet of a school, daycare center, or any facility in which children commonly congregate unless communities establish their own local siting requirements.
That I don't think is a good idea.
I think
The
we're...
point is to establish your own requirements, not to go back. I'm just
I
saying.
think it's too broad. I
Yeah.
don't think it fits. I appreciate the tactic. I don't think it fits within the scope of the original article because of how different it is from what was proposed in the warrant.
Well, I thought that town council opined that we could choose to move forward a version that was less restrictive than what has been proposed.
That is true, but I think this is different enough that it runs afoul of those requirements. That's my understanding.
I was just going to say the same thing as David, which is in the memo as well,
Yeah.
which is that you can choose something more narrow as part of your vote. Or I'm saying narrow, that's maybe not the right word, but would not include as many, citations to places where children commonly congregate as what is put before you this evening.
I have issues with that language without knowing more about how it's defined.
Well, and I would just state additionally, we still do not, that still does not address some of the concerns that have been raised this evening about the impact on the town, the location. We still are in this 500-foot issue, which we already know what that looks like. So I think there's still a lot of questions, even if you choose to reduce or change modify the language to come up with a vote for this evening.
Oh, I agree, and I still think even if we were to do that and present this to town meeting, that it would have to be with the understanding that there would be a study group to continue to.
And I think
study
part of the language that was in front of town meeting and got it to approval has been lost, and it's kind of rediscovered tonight through this memo, and that's unless communities establish their own local siting requirements. And I think what we do is commit to establishing our own local siting requirements. That may include a buffer zone, it may not include a buffer zone. That may include powers far beyond what the ARB has, Board of Health, police.
Yeah.
But I don't think we get there by putting something in place. And then going back to town meeting in another year and pulling back on certain restrictions that have been put in place, or trying to define where children a facility in which children commonly congregate based on however that's been defined by the state and by state law that's come forward.
The issue that I'm hearing is the state regulation, if I understood how it was written, presupposes that the town hasn't narrowed in any way where these type of facilities can go. And therefore, the state regs have a 500-foot buffer zone. It sounds like what the town did, though, is they narrowed it by limiting it to the B3 and B5 zones, right, as a substitute, not realizing, right, that
No,
it was a
the state
substitute?
changed its interpretation to
Right.
mirror what you just said
Right.
after town
Right.
meeting's vote.
Right. but
So it
that's-
wasn't that town meeting didn't realize it. Town meeting acted in accordance with the then current interpretation from the state.
But we don't know what town meeting would have done if it had the actual interpretation.
We
Well,
don't.
the state
don't.
changed its interpretation.
Right, but we don't know what town meeting would have done if it knew, because then they might have taken out your map and said, hey, that looks too restrictive. We don't know what town meeting would have done.
And again, it's,
Can I,
can't get too far down the road of hypothetical.
in terms of the two paths in front of us, we're all agreeing that we'd like to see a study group to come up with something better. One path is do nothing and then have a study group. And the other path is put in the buffer zone as proposed and then have a study group.
No, there's a third path.
Well, can I finish my train of thought? So if we do nothing, so what I've heard from the Board of Health is that they get many, they've had many applicants inquire about putting in dispensaries. They're not just the 11 Water Street, there have been multiple applicants for this town. So if we have no buffer zone in place and we get an applicant for East Arlington or Arlington Heights, and there's no buffer zone in place, then we're going to be in the same position that we are now, where we have this applicant in this horrible position, but they're grandfathered in because there was no defined buffer zone at the time of their application, or because the preschool wasn't there at the time of their application. So if we do nothing, we run the risk of being in this horrible position yet again. If we do something, at least we can say, look, don't put any dispensaries next to preschools until we figure out something better. Right? I agree with you that if you want something better, we'll have a study group, we'll come up with something better, but at least we won't have dispensaries next to preschools.
But that ignores the fact that there is an existing process in place that gets, that should screen out those inappropriate locations.
No, the existing process said 11 Water Street couldn't be denied because there was no so when I listened to the tapes, they say the reason why we allowed 11 Water Street was because we had no way to say no, because there was no operating preschool at the time. That's the only reason.
I think that's an unfair reduction of the arguments and the deliberations that were over.
I'm sorry, that's the way it was.
That's an extremely unfair and reductive description
Well, then
of the work that this board puts
Well, then
in.
I think that we should go back and listen to this discussions, and it's
We're not going to go
unfortunate-
any further than tonight.
It's unfortunate that Council Heim isn't here to reiterate the point, because he said exactly what I just said in one of the previous meetings. So there was no way to say no to 11 Water Street because they weren't breaking any rules. So we had to let them go ahead with the application.
So I think.
So what, tell me what law will prevent a dispensary next to Casa Esme?
I'm not going to pine on that, but I don't think you have a fundamental understanding about what this board is
argue that that's probably a
supposed to
good
do.
location.
And I don't want to have this, I don't think it's fair.
Henry will be here all night.
I don't think it's fair to have this conversation. Yeah, the decision on Water Street's made, we're not here to relitigate that.
I'm not relitigating that.
I
I'm saying,
think-
how do we
don't-
prevent another mistake in the future?
I don't feel that that was a mistake, and I don't think you understand the process.
Well, then explain it to me.
There's a process, and I'm not going to waste time tonight, but the special permit process goes through
Just describe
environmental
it.
design review. There are several steps that an applicant has to take through the department to even get before this board, and to give public notice, and to prove that they've met certain criteria that are set by the state to be an appropriately sited and approved location.
And so what would prohibit a dispensary next door to a preschool at this point in time?
Environmental design review, availability of space, appropriateness of site,
All
would
the
pass
things,
all of
Board of
those.
all
Selectmen.
the things that went into the article.
And they would pass all of those.
What do you mean they would pass? No, we have control over
But
all
they-
the things that an
they
EDR
would
does,
pass
plus the
environmental
police.
review. They would-
Yeah.
We're too far off track again on a
Yeah.
hypothetical, and it's not fair, and, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask if the board's agenda calls for getting into Articles 10 and further this evening, or?
We will move on to Article 10, yes. So,
And that's the last one.
yeah, I do apologize for this going well over time.
I would like to make a motion of no action on warrant Article 9. Which is defined as, thanks. Thank you. Zoning bylaw amendment, medical marijuana treatment center buffer zone. I'm moving for no action.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Can I ask,
Aye.
can I ask a question?
You may.
Can we put something either in that or in the report that indicates that we will
There will be
organize
something in our report to town meeting.
about the study group? Because I think that's essential.
And I
part
think
of
it's
this.
important to commit to a continuation of
Okay.
this discussion and the process.
And I vote aye also.
Aye.
Thank you.
So in the report to town meeting, the draft would come here next Monday night, so you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback about if you have any further feedback on that report committee.
All right, moving on to continued public hearing on Article 10, which I do not have.
So I forwarded to you from the proponent, what Jen Weber, I don't have her address in front of me, but
Person in the lab.
it's dated March 17th, 2017. I received this March 20th. To whom it may concern, I wish to withdraw my warrant article concerning redistricting from R2 to R1 Mount Gilboa District. I will revisit this change in the future with more information and less scope. Sincerely, James Weber.
So, with the withdrawal, I think the appropriate vote is no action. It should be noted that Janice is a member of the residential study group and participates in those meetings and those discussions that have been discussed over and over again.
I motion to,
Before we, well,
Just saying you move no action on the warrant article and the.
no, no comment?
I mean,
Sorry.
well, that's up to you, I suppose. If you think there were two people here who have public comment, then you can take it. But the proponent is not here.
no.
So,
So the proponent is not here and wishes to withdraw her motion from consideration. She's essentially asked that we make a vote of no action with continued discussion. Before we get to a vote, I do encourage both of you, since I'm sure that you, or anyone who's been here, to look into the residential study group. The two people who are here in front of you tonight are well-versed in Arlington real estate trends and Arlington zoning law. It is an extremely productive and interesting group to be part of. They are public meetings, so if you are available, I encourage you to attend. They are held, some are held in the morning, some are held at night to accommodate schedules, but it won't take you too long to catch up if you do attend.
next meeting is March 30th at 9 a.m. First floor conference room here at Town Hall. Please,
Please join
you're
us.
welcome to join us.
With that, there's a vote on the table.
A motion to, no action on Article 10, zoning bylaw amendment R2 to R1.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to table the minutes to next Monday.
Thank you.
With that, I'll take a motion to, in closing, our zoning warrant articles 6 through 10. We will continue Article 1 and 2 for next week.